sun has gone down. They've brought in generators to bring some light to the scene so crews can see what they're doing. Fox 5's Patrick McGrath is live on Capitol Hill.
Patrick.
I am here with Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat of Maryland. Congressman, were any of your constituents in the Pentagon when the crash came?
Pat, I'm sure that some of my constituents were in the Pentagon. I have not yet gotten any indications of whether some of my constituents were injured or killed in this vicious attack.
Do you know the extent of it?
Substantial, but I don't know numbers. This is a day, obviously, of grief, of shock, and of anger for America. We perhaps have sustained the biggest loss of life in a single day in an act of war and terrorism that ever happened. I don't know that to be the case, but it is possible. And I think it's a day when all of us are resolved to come together as a nation and confront the perpetrators of this act, and to confront those who would sanction and facilitate, aid and abet, if you will, perpetration of this act, and allow people in their countries to organize an effort like this and to use their countries as a base of operations to perpetrate this kind of heinous, cowardly act on innocent people.
We've never gone after the states before. Sometimes, strikes against terrorist base camps. This would be a considerable escalation, would it not?
I think the civilized world needs to come together and agree that no state will be allowed to give sanctuary to terrorists. No state will be allowed to be a co-conspirator, if you will, complicit in the perpetration of an act such as happened today in America.
Mm-hmm. We, of course, are the likely target. What changes are we going to see, do you think, as a result of this in the Washington area?
Well, I think you're going to see tightened security, obviously, not only at the Capitol and the White House, but a lot of other public buildings and other areas that may be symbolic targets for terrorists. In addition, I think that every American's experience on flying an airplane is going to be very substantially different. Obviously, an awful lot of people got through. We don't know how they did it yet. We'll have to find out. But I think security needs to be.
Well, we apologize for that.
Just lost Patrick McGrath. Obviously, security at airports is going to be a major topic of discussion from here on out. In results in wake of this situation. One of the problems that we're having when it comes to getting coverage, and it may seem a little lopsided as far as the information is concerned, we're getting a lot out of New York simply because it happened in the middle of one of the busiest cities in the world. At the Pentagon, though, where Bob Barnard is, he's at one of the most secure facilities in the world, and so that makes it a little more difficult to sort of put our arms around what the situation is as far as any recovery efforts that are going on at the Pentagon. But Bob, maybe you can bring us up to date.
Although we did just about 10-15 minutes ago, so it's hard to tell where the firefighting effort is at this point, whether they've actually got the fire extinguished or not. But I think, as you can see in this picture, there's an awful lot of smoke. So they are still working this as an active fire, and that is what they need to do before, frankly, they can send in the urban search and rescue teams from both Fairfax County and Montgomery County, which are both working for FEMA. FEMA has basically taken over the operations here as far as trying to find people, perhaps people who may have survived the explosion here. The FBI is, frankly, in charge of the investigation. And I don't know if you can see there off to the right of the screen, there is a glow of flame within that thick black smoke. So I guess the answer is right there in front of us, that this fire continues to burn, and it may burn for some time. And if that's the case, then as you hear helicopters flying overhead as they ferry crews in and out of the Pentagon, which is open, as we saw that press briefing earlier by the Defense Secretary and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Part of the Pentagon is open, but the firefighting continues here, and they don't know, I would imagine, when they could get in there and start some of the search and perhaps recovery effort that they need to do. But they have illuminated the building. They brought in a number of generators. They've got a lot of lights working. So this will be an active scene throughout the night, and they will first try to extinguish the fire and then get into the building. They frankly have not been in on any of the floors that you see there that are just utterly devastated by this plane crash, this directed terrorist act on the Pentagon. And so it's an eerie sight. Perhaps pales in comparison with what we've seen in New York today. But nonetheless, it's been a huge impact here on the military community. The section of the building, the western part, this is the western of the 5 sides of the building, and in there were offices that were just moving back to this part of the Pentagon because it had recently been renovated. So they don't have a full accounting of who all was working in the building, but they have been asking, at least the Navy has been asking for Marine Corps and Navy personnel, both civilian and active duty, to call in, let them know if they made it out, because frankly everybody's scattered. People ran as far as Arlington National Cemetery to get out and try to get home. So they don't know who all made it out alive, and until they do, they won't know who may be still inside and did not survive this act of terrorism, or perhaps are alive but trapped and need help and will get help as soon as they put out the fire.
Bob, are you seeing any of those efforts? We know the Fairfax Urban Search Rescue Team is there on the scene. Are you seeing anything besides what appears to be minor firefighting efforts and actually looking for survivors in that wreckage that we're looking at?
No, as we go in on the section there that was cratered by the American Airlines flight out of Dulles, you don't see anything going on in there. At least we haven't, and I don't. As we look closely there, still don't see any activity. And when they went through the Murrah building in Oklahoma City 6 years ago, you could see the dogs, you could see the people, and in fact they, in that case, were putting American flags up on the visible portion of the floors to let others know that that floor had been searched and all the recovery efforts had been completed. And frankly, we're not going to see those flags anytime tonight. I would imagine that if they do that, it's going to be some time from now as they wait to get in there. And again, I don't believe they believe this building is safe enough for them to go in. And we saw earlier a bunch of rigging and digging trucks, they were called, going in there. I believe they're going to do some fortification work in the most heavily damaged sections before they would send people back in there, because frankly it's, besides the fire, not safe for anybody to go in because structurally the building may not be sound.
All right, Bob Barnard, live at the Pentagon. That is very typical of these type situations. And you saw the tragic effects that happen in New York City when you send firefighters into a building that's not stable. That is the most extreme example of an unsafe building, going in and trying to rescue people. But firefighters will tell you, when they go to a scene, they really like to know whether or not it's structurally sound before they go racing into to make any sort of rescue attempts. And in this situation, while obviously there's no immediate pressing danger except for the fact that there may be lives on the line inside, the fire department and those authorities are making sure that everything is safe and sound before they go inside and do what they can to save if any lives if they can.
That's right, and you said New York was a prime example of why. I mean, we're talking about some 400 firefighters rushing to the scene there, perhaps half now missing, and we understand that another 78 New York City police are missing at this hour. They've set up a field hospital at the site, but that's part of the reason why. You just want to make sure that although there has been probably a large number of several people who have lost their lives, you don't want that number to go up any higher than it needs to be. This all began at 9 o'clock this morning when first we learned that 2 planes had been hijacked and were being flown right into the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center.
Those 2 planes, the 9 o'clock a.m. there on the timeline, actually it's a rough estimate of the time. About 8:45, it was American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. We were speaking with a retired general who's an aviation expert. He's been analyzing the flight paths of these planes that were involved in these terrorist attacks, and obviously all 4 were hijacked, according to the Attorney General John Ashcroft. That first flight, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, the people that took over that flight were armed with knives and crashed into the World Trade Center South Tower. 9:03 a.m. United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston also to Los Angeles hit the North Tower. 65 people were on board that plane. President Bush spoke at 9:30 this morning. He is, we should mention to you, going to speak now at about 8:30 this evening. More extensive remarks in a much more presidential setting than the classroom setting he was in earlier today when all these events unfolded. He will be speaking at 8:30, and of course we will bring that to you live.
And it was just about 15 minutes later that we learned that here, here at home, another commercial airliner loaded with passengers had been hijacked and was headed directly for the Pentagon. By 10 o'clock, we learned that a plane, a fourth commercial jetliner, had in fact been hijacked and had been downed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
There you see the timeline as far as the towers collapsing, and that perhaps is the most devastating, if you have to put it into those terms, prioritize one versus the other. Perhaps the most devastating when those towers came down on firefighters, innocent bystanders, and of course people that were inside the building as well. Those are survivors that are being sprayed off there, making sure that they're cleaned up, don't have any contamination from fuel, debris, and that sort of material that comes crashing out of a World Trade Center when a plane goes slamming into it.
And even if there aren't physical injuries like that woman that we just saw being sprayed off by firefighters, you can imagine the mental damage that's been done. It will take a while for the folks who were inside that building, the family members, to recover, as well as the nation.
6,000 healthcare officials have been activated, we're told, by Tommy Thompson, and that's obviously an indication of the amount of grieving that's going to go on and the amount of support, if you will, for both survivors and for those even remotely touched. You know, we talked to a representative from the D.C. Department of Mental Health who brought up a very good point that just children in our area don't know anybody, don't know anything about what is going on, but see these, in many instances, graphic pictures which need to be seen by the American public, but for small people with little eyes, and they take it all in and obviously are going to be shook by the images that they see. The biggest thing the representative from the Department of Mental Health said is to talk and to keep talking about what is going on, why it's going on, the process that is now taking place of looking for those responsible, looking for those who may still survive, and begin the process of healing.
As bad as we feel about it here in this country, condolences are coming in from all over the world, from London, from, interestingly enough, Muammar Gaddafi, who has been accused of backing international terrorists, calling today's attacks horrifying. Condolences coming in from all over, Norway, Russia, the list goes on and on.
The initial prime suspect, of course, on everybody's tip of everybody's lips is Osama bin Laden, housed in Afghanistan. We saw earlier live pictures of explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan. There were initial thoughts that we might be retaliating for what has happened today, and it turns out, according to the Associated Press, that no, that is an internal conflict that's playing out in Afghanistan this evening regarding some of the a general there and some of the issues that folks have with that general in Afghanistan. So the explosions that we saw earlier, not a retaliation, at least from the United States part, according to the Associated Press, for Osama bin Laden, who, the reason he is at the top of everybody's list, because he's got the resources, he's got the know-how, and he has mentioned that he has got a personal holy war against the United States.
I want to let you know that as far as the federal government is concerned, they are trying to get the country's transportation systems back up and running. They're talking about the rail system, highways, certainly all of the airports. Unprecedented today to have all of the country's airports grounded, no flights taking off or landing, to have our international flights redirected to Canada. But what they are telling us now is that they are trying very hard, this is coming from Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, to have things back up and running at least sometime afternoon tomorrow. As you know, there are some areas of transportation that have been able to reopen, like Amtrak and Union Station, but on a limited basis. But they are hoping to have the transportation system across this country back up and running by sometime around noon tomorrow.
We have a couple of, actually one phone number and one website that Attorney General John Ashcroft mentioned in his press conference about 45 minutes or so ago. We'll start with the website, which is www.ifccfbi.gov. And that is a source of information. More importantly, though, it is an outlet for anybody to report information about these attacks anything that you may have seen or not seen. The address there is on your screen. Seen being anything that out of the ordinary struck you as the events unfolded, or not seen where you thought that something should have been taking place and wasn't, and that raised your suspicions as well. There's the website on your screen, IFCC, either .fbi.gov or IFCCFBI.gov. Try both of those. We also have a 1-800 number, which is a source for people to leave contact information if you are a victim or a family of somebody who has a victim in their family as well. Call this number. You can leave contact information. You can also get information from them about your loved ones. The number there is on your screen, 800-331-0075.
The U.S. military, of course, has been put on high alert, the highest possible. Delta is the level. It's the highest possible on all the military installations, federal buildings across this country following the terrorist attacks today. Right now, 2 aircraft carriers, they left the U.S. Naval Base in Norfolk, Virginia, and they will provide additional air defense for Washington and for New York. And as you know, there are warships that are now headed toward the harbor in New York as additional backup as well.
When it comes to trying to track down who is responsible for this, obviously very early in the stages of tracking down those who created such a havoc across the eastern seaboard here. But a few things that perhaps even those who pulled this off didn't realize is the modern day technology. Folks have cell phones on airplanes, and as tragic as it may seem, there were at least 2 cell phone calls that we know of on 2 separate flights today that were made to either loved ones or to 911 about the events that were taking place. One from United Airlines Flight 93 that was bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco that crashed about 80 miles northwest of the presidential retreat, Camp David. An individual on that plane dialed 911, claimed that he was locked in the bathroom and that they had been hijacked. Those were his words: "We are being hijacked, we are being hijacked." The FBI is investigating that call and looking for any clues to lead them to the perpetrators, as well as another cell phone call from what ended up being a fatality on American Airlines Flight 77, which was bound out of our own Dulles to Los Angeles, LAX. Barbara Olson was on that flight. She left this morning for Los Angeles after having breakfast with her husband to celebrate his birthday. Called, according to family friends, called her husband twice to describe the events that were taking place before that plane crashed into the Pentagon.
As you see the Pentagon, we're starting to see some dark smoke again coming from the roof of the Pentagon, as well as some flames. We thought that we had seen the last of both, but apparently not the case tonight. Now, we're going to go to our newsroom to talk to Stuart Snyder. And I have been waiting to talk to you, Stuart, because I remember you were out at the scene at the Pentagon with one of our reporters, Audrey Barnes, many, many hours ago when we first started our coverage. Now, tell us what happened. You were there. You took some pictures. Is that correct?
That's correct. I arrived about an hour and 15 minutes after the tragedy and was fortunate enough to work my way towards the front and get some rather revealing, rather exclusive photos.
Now, if I recall correctly, Audrey was holding those. They're the photos right now on the digital camera. I was hoping that we were able to download some of them. Talk through the pictures as we're seeing them.
That picture, I was about 150, 200 yards away. You can see as I approach the calamity, we get closer and closer and see a closer view and more detailed view. This is where the communications area was set up, and coming from beyond that we'll come up to the helipad where the injured were transported.
What was going through your mind at the time? Did you have any idea what had happened, or did you just think that the Pentagon had exploded?
I went down the elevator with a gentleman at my hotel, and he kind of shared a thought that was ironic to me, that it was almost like Die Hard 5, in that we've seen this before and we've become somewhat desensitized. But once I walked up on the scene and saw the depth of the tragedy, literally brought tears to my eyes. And of course my heart and prayers go out to the families of those involved, and my thanks go to all the service people, because watching them at ground zero was an amazing, amazing, wonderful experience to see that in all of this tragedy there's a bright, hopeful spot that we cling to, and that it became apparent through these American servicemen and women.
And through a lot of the volunteers that we've seen, from giving blood to rushing to the triage centers to see if there's anything that people can do. So again, go back to what was going through your head at the time, Stuart. Again, did you know it was an aircraft? Did you see any of the aircraft itself?
I was watching most of the news channels, and I was actually booked on this flight this morning. My sister was booked on the flight out of Boston last night, and my mother had called me in a panic and had voiced just a number of concerns. But fortunately, my sister took an early flight and I decided to stay over. These are the poles that the plane hit. Let me just interject. This is the flight path of the airplane as it came through. It clipped that second pole right in front of you, and you can see the policeman there. And that is ground zero, where the plane pile drove right into the building. There was nothing left except a C, I believe, from American Airlines, portion about 8 feet by 4 feet. To 100 yards to the left of that site, but the plane actually came in and pile drove through one of the lights, and then a second one it clipped halfway through and then drove right into the Pentagon and disintegrated into nothing. There was nothing left but bolts and parts, and then a very small piece to the left, which was had a C, which I've flown American quite a bit, and it's you could tell it was part of the American fuselage.
So it was flying that low to the ground that it was able to clip those poles.
And ironically, it was about 50 to 60 feet above the ground and maintained that level, and I believe flew right into the Pentagon because there are no skid marks leading up to that.
Wow. Let's go back to your mother and the situation. I don't want to just gloss over that. You were supposed to be on board that flight.
I had actually booked. I hadn't paid for the ticket. I fly coast to coast quite a bit and internationally. And I flew up here from Mexico yesterday and was booked to go back this morning, but because of some personal business, I stayed an extra day or so. But I've done this trip in the last 2 months probably 4 times. I fly United, I fly American. They're best coast to coast. They're direct, and fortunately God was on our side, and we didn't have any challenges.
Why do you think that was, that you weren't on board that flight, Stuart?
I'm lucky like that. Fortunately, I've been through some difficult physical challenges in my life, and perhaps God smiled on me again, and I'm blessed and fortunate that happened.
Is it bittersweet since so many lives were lost?
It's bittersweet in that once you hear the depth of the tragedy, when you start identifying with 200 firefighters that came back in to help and to be part of this and to do what they could to prevent more problems, and you hear that they perished. When that type of level of closeness, where you realize it's people like you and I that are involved in this and not just nameless, faceless, it really strikes home and makes it that much more painful.
Well, you were looking at the Pentagon. I don't know if you can see the picture right now, Stuart, that it's still on fire. The dark smoke still billowing in there, and we know that they have not been able to even get in there to try to rescue anyone or to begin the task of pulling out the bodies. What is your feeling tonight as this goes into many, many hours now?
Certainly, the calamity can never, ever be, I don't think, appreciated by anyone. Who can cope with this type of tragedy? You think about the Hindenburg, you think about the Kennedy tragedy, you think about Pearl Harbor, and I think all of those combined pale in comparison to the depth of this. A close friend of mine, Bruce Deming, shared with me today that this really is the awakening of America to the other type of terrorist challenges that the world faces, is that now we as citizens of the United States and people of the world have to realize it's in our backyard.
Quite true. Do you mind if I ask what type of work you do, Stuart?
I'm in the resort business.
So I imagine you will be at some point getting on an airplane and heading back to the West Coast. Do you think that you're going to have any trouble doing that?
Not at all. I have faith in God, I have faith in country, and I certainly have faith in the mechanics and the ability of our people to protect us as best they can. Essentially, I also feel that many other countries and nations face this challenge every single day, and I think that America, unfortunately, is now being brought into that fold, but it was a matter of not whether, but when.
Well, Stuart Snyder, you are a very fortunate man, and we appreciate you sharing your time and your photos with us here at Fox News.
Indeed I am. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My thanks to Brian Bolter for sitting in up here while I took a quick break and got prepared for the 10 o'clock newscast. Very quickly, we want to share with you that we're concerned about some of the ancillary things that we'll have going on in our city tomorrow. We're still looking at the fire burning over in Arlington there at the Pentagon. But there are those simple things tomorrow, like mail service. Are we going to have mail service tomorrow? Let's talk to Dolores Collette, who is the Postmaster General and has that information for us. What will happen tomorrow, Dolores? Are you there?
On hold, yes.
Hi. Can you tell us what the mail service will be like tomorrow?
Right now, tomorrow, there will be no mail service in the Washington, D.C. offices.
Okay.
And I say that now because right now there is a state of emergency in D.C. But that state of emergency can be lifted, or it can be lifted enough to let us inside of the city. So if it is not lifted, the processing plant and the delivery and retail units within Washington, D.C. will not open. If it does lift, then we will start off tomorrow business as usual.
Let me ask you a question. When we have an emergency like this, and certainly one of the concerns that we had even with the IMF World Bank meetings coming up toward the end of the month, they were concerned about things like letter bombs or bombs in packages. Does this mean at this point that there would be a search or some special security operation that would take place over and above what you normally do?
Yes, we work with the postal inspectors, and they work with the federal government, and we do have certain things in place for the security of our employees, for the security of the customers also.
Anything special, though, in light of what's taken place this day?
In light right now, we're saying that we have really closed down D.C. I can't say right now.
All right,
now, what may happen tomorrow with us opening, could be another issue.
Thanks very much, Dolores Collette, Postmaster General of D.C.
Postmaster, Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think I used the word general, and I overstated her position.
Well, she clarified it for us.
She did.
Park Police now, just to let you know, have reopened some of the remaining roads around the mall. Constitution between 15th and 17th Streets, according to the Associated Press, has now been have both been reopened. Southbound 15th at Constitution also reopened. Also opened the bridges between the District and Virginia and I-395 in both directions. So those had been closed down all morning, well into the evening, so those are back open. But look at the flames.
I was just about to say, isn't it disturbing to see these flames still burning so brightly 10-plus hours since that airplane crashed into the side of the Pentagon?
And crews cannot go inside to begin the other portion of their task until the flames have been knocked down and the building is secured so that we don't have any more loss of life.
Brian Bolter has been our partner throughout this afternoon and being able to help us out and getting information to us, scurrying around the newsroom, gathering bits and pieces of information as they come in concerning this story that is such a major story, the world's most important story right now as it happens. Brian has a wrap-up on some of the things that have taken place.
The attack on America became an attack on Washington at 9:45 this morning. Initial reports indicated an explosion at the Pentagon, but eyewitnesses reported seeing a plane seconds before the blast.
I saw a large airliner-sized plane, roughly a 767-size airliner, very deep descent, approaching the Pentagon. As I didn't actually see the impact, but I did see, hear the blast and saw the smoke rising from the crash later. And this was, just shortly after hearing the news about the crashes at the World Trade Towers.
Hudson says the plane, American Airlines Flight 77, aimed directly at the Pentagon. There were 64 people on board that plane, which left Dulles bound for Los Angeles. Hudson didn't see the impact, but told our reporter he could see the evidence.
Just seemed like parts of the landing carriage or possibly the engines.
The Pentagon, which is the nation's military headquarters and houses the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Departments of Defense, Air Force, Army, and Navy, was the third U.S. target of the morning. The plane hit near the Pentagon's south entrance, which backs into the 5-acre courtyard.
I work in OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense Policy, and we just finished our staff meeting. Somebody told us about the New York tragedy. We turn on CNN, and all of a sudden I hear a boom myself.
The boom was an airliner packed with people. There were casualties on the plane, in the Pentagon, and on the ground. This woman was inside the Pentagon where the plane hit.
One young black lady was running down the hall screaming and hollering, saying, "Get out, get out." It was a bomb. And so everybody stopped and looked, and then there was some more people running and screaming and hollering, "Get out, it is a bomb." And then when I was exiting out the door, they did say it was a bomb, and everybody looked up. It was all black smoke.
Moments later, this witness was in disbelief when she learned it was a plane packed with people that hit the Pentagon.
Not here, not here, not here, never in 1,000 years. But it's getting closer.
Brian Bolter reporting on the events that have taken place. Again, a live picture now. You can see the generators and lights that have been set up on special pedestals to be able to keep the Pentagon illuminated while they fight those fires, to try to get them out, to get the rescue crews inside to see who might be trapped, who might be saved from this tragedy that's taken place today.
And just a reminder that we are in countdown mode right now, awaiting President Bush, who's going to be addressing us from the White House. But as we continue to take a live look at the Pentagon, you can see sort of in silhouette some of the firefighters, some of the crew on the roof right in front of the flames as they try to get control of this fire that has been burning now for several hours. We also wanted to tell you that some of the casualties are now being identified, and we have learned that one of the people who died on board the United flight that crashed into the World Trade Center this morning was a former Caps player, Garnett Ace Bailey. That person, a former Caps player, was on board the United flight that crashed into the World Trade Center this morning.
The magnitude of the idea that 4 airliners could fall out of the sky within hours of one another in one single day is just overwhelming. This video hardly does justice to what we've seen from the Dayside video, which just, again, as you look at how far that aircraft got into the outside wall of the Pentagon, unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
It is. It's quite sobering. Let's go live now to George W. Bush.
We're waiting for the president to start here. They're probably getting ready for all the stations across the country to be prepared for his talk. He had said that he would address the nation. He got the word down in Florida as he was talking about a program for schools. The information was whispered to him. He passed it on to the folks there.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
President George W. Bush.
Addressing the nation from the White House, saying that terrorist attacks were supposed to frighten the country into chaos and retreat, but he said the terrorists have failed.
Quoting Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and certainly this country has been through the valley of the shadow of death today.
President George Bush was not in Washington when the attacks happened. He was in Florida at the time. He was taken to a couple of locations to keep him safe. And this is what was happening while he was away. Firefighters, EMS workers, police officers, volunteers rushing to the Pentagon in disbelief, having to face the fact that a commercial airliner loaded with passengers, crew members, and 2 pilots crashed into the Pentagon.
That timeline is still so remarkable. I mean, here the president has been told that an aircraft, a passenger plane, has been crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. He passes the information on to reporters, and within minutes, another aircraft crashes into another tower. And before it's all over, another aircraft, yet another aircraft, has crashed into the Pentagon. And yet another aircraft, also hijacked, apparently being thwarted to be sent on to a mission to either come back to Camp David or to the Pentagon, we're not sure which, heads back toward Washington, but goes down, straight down, we are told, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
Then the first tower collapses. Inside are still the tourists, the people who worked in that building, the people who were trying to escape, and all of the rescue workers who had rushed to the scene to try to get them out. At least 200 firefighters now missing in New York. At least 78 of New York City's police department, members of the police department, missing. Then, within a half an hour, the second tower comes crashing to the ground, leaving behind a gray cloud of debris and dust, people gasping and choking, trying to figure out what happened, trying to figure out if their loved ones, if their friends, their co-workers made it out.
And not very long after that, within a couple of hours, a 47-story building, a part of the World Trade Center complex, came crashing down. Fortunately, it had been evacuated, and just the sheer weight, I'm sure, of certainly the stress of the explosion that had taken place damaged it to the point that it actually just came to pieces and came crashing down. The video that we saw earlier today, again, so much video that we've seen today that just doesn't seem real.
Sean Yancey is at one of the, well, you're right there at Dulles Airport. I thought you were still at the hotel, Sean. But you have been at a location where family members and friends have gathered today to support each other and to face this awful reality. Tell us more.
That's right, Tracy. All evening we have been at the Marriott out here at the Dulles, and we've seen family members come in, obviously grief-stricken. We've seen them crying. We've seen them with hands up to their faces. They obviously did not want to. They obviously did not want to talk to us about the situation. Many of them just don't know. They're still trying to cope with this and deal with the loss of loved ones. On that flight today that left Dulles and ended up crashing into the Pentagon, there were, I believe, 50-some passengers on that. Excuse me, there were 58 passengers, 6 crew members on that Flight 77 that left Dulles and was headed en route to L.A. There are counselors on hand. In fact, we spoke to a priest who saw the incident unfold. He went down and talked to folks down at Arlington Hospital. He made it up here to talk to some of the victims' families that were here. In fact, he told me he spoke to one family that had lost a mother and a father. They didn't understand. They wanted to blame people, and he told them, you know, it wasn't about blame. It was just right now about dealing with their emotions and their feelings and the loss of their family members. Also, the hotel tonight says they are full to capacity with folks who would have traveled out of Dulles this evening but could not go anywhere. The hotel, I believe, has room for approximately 367 rooms there. They are filled to capacity. They plan to put about 50 cots in their conference room tonight to bring in more people so people have room to stay. Many people were inconvenienced by this, but the hotel, the Marriott, is also dealing with tragedy tonight. They lost their hotel that was underneath the World Trade Center. The building actually collapsed on the hotel. So folks here at the hotel out at Dulles, new people there, they're also trying to deal with the grief. Tonight, if you take a look out here at Dulles, it's basically like a ghost town. There is no activity. Of course, you know, the FAA has suspended all flights in and out of every airport across the country. If you look at the parking lot tonight, it's bare. There are still a few cars here, but there is absolutely no activity. And within the last few hours, airport officials shut down the access road into the airport area. So if we leave, we can't get back in tonight. They are keeping everyone out of this area. Again, a ghost area tonight. Families of the victims that were on that flight en route from Dulles to Los Angeles are going to the Marriott out here at Dulles Airport. So far, they've had about 3 or 4 or 5 families come in tonight. Many folks are choosing to stay at home. It's up to them what they do. Right now, that's what's going on out here. We'll keep you posted as we get more information in. Tracy?
Sean Yancey, we appreciate that update from Dulles Airport.
When we were listening to the president just a moment ago, what we heard was, of course, the words of sadness, the words of the resolve of the American people to withstand this challenge to our freedom, this assault on our country and on Americans. It was very interesting to see, though, that one of the things that the president said was that he would make no distinction between terrorists and those who harbor them. Tonight we have seen a lot of fighting going on in Afghanistan, believed to be the stronghold of Osama bin Laden. Where that fighting may be coming from forces within there and conflicting forces within the country of Afghanistan. Certainly the message has been made very clear that if it's the Taliban that has in fact been protecting Osama bin Laden, then it will not be protected from the wrath of the United States as it seeks to find him and to stop this terrorist act.
Let's go now to Fox 5's Will Thomas, who is downtown in the district. Will, this was a ghost town earlier. Is it still like that tonight?
Absolutely. From this downtown area, Connecticut and Kay, we've been monitoring locations throughout Washington, D.C., trying to keep you in touch, as many of you have taken the advice from Mayor Williams and stayed inside during this state of emergency. At this location, we've set up a small monitor where bystanders are watching some of the coverage. Some of them just watch President Bush speak. We have Bill from Washington, D.C., Ben from England. Let's start with you, Bill. Give me your reaction to the president's speech.
Well, I thought it was just what was needed. It was perfect. He was calm, measured, reassuring.
Did you feel that he gave you a sense of security here in the United States?
Absolutely. It was just what was needed,
okay.
I thought.
Bill, thank you. Let's move on to Ben from England, correct? Yeah. You have probably never seen anything like this.
Not at this scale. I mean, it's just totally surreal, really, that we're standing here today. I mean, we were in the Arlington National Cemetery when the Pentagon went up, and I just can't believe what we're standing here tonight and the events that we've witnessed throughout the day.
Certainly some of the IRA attacks in England and throughout Europe have given you a sense of disconnection from law enforcement and how their ability is to protect you. Did you feel safe here in Washington even after the events began to unfold here?
I think of the initial, obviously the rumours start flying as to what exactly happened, and then we were hearing things that were happening in New York. So yeah, there was an initial kind of, oh my God, are we going to be next? Is there something else going to happen? But now, obviously, listening to the President and what he's had to say, very statesmanlike and very calming in what is a very, very frightening series of events for during the day.
Okay. Ben and Bill, both, thank you very much. Tracy, you asked if this looked like a ghost town. Let's just take a look. Right down here, it is still very empty, very few cars, still a perimeter set up around the White House, the old executive office building. Believe it or not, there is practically no traffic, very few cars on the road, just the occasional emergency vehicle, and in some cases escorts, members of Congress in some cases being escorted through here. There are mounted police officers working the neighborhoods. They tell me, we want to give you at home a sense of security. We want you to see us out on patrol to let you know that you are safe at home. And we're going to be talking to one of those mounted police officers coming up a little later. For now, I'm Will Thomas. Back to you in the studio.
All right, we'll look forward to that. Thanks, Will.
One of the cars out on the streets this afternoon had the executive assistant chief and also the deputy mayor for public safety, Margaret Kellums. They were going through the streets to make sure that everything was okay. And Margaret Kellums is on the phone with us right now. Tell us what you found when you were out there today and what we shall see next.
When we went out today, we were pleased to see that the streets were relatively clear. We think that we managed to get a lot of people out of the city and safely back to their homes very quickly. There's a tremendous police presence out in the streets right now. We have all of our officers on duty and working out in the communities to make sure that people are feeling a sense of safety out there.
The roads now, Margaret, are mainly back open. Is that correct, including the bridges?
That's correct. There are obviously some small areas where there is still additional security, for example, around the White House. If people were trying to travel close to some of those places, they might have a little bit of trouble for the time being. But fundamentally, the streets are open again.
In this situation where you were traveling the streets and trying to be sure that everything was okay, were you pleased with the response of the city to this incident?
We're very pleased with the response of the city, and we're very pleased with the response of the federal agencies operating here as well. Everything came together. There was a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration very quickly, and information getting out there that I think helped keep a sense of calm in D.C.
I know, Margaret, that you like to think that a lot of agencies, whether federal or in the district, are prepared to handle emergencies. But in your own mind, could you have imagined anything like this?
I don't think anyone could have imagined anything like this. In the deep recesses of our mind somewhere, we might imagine a terrorist event, and we always plan for the worst. We have contingency plans here for any kind of cataclysmic event, whether it's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster. But no one really wants to believe that's going to happen, and I think we all had an eye-opening experience today.
Indeed.
Let me ask a question that may be a tough one for you to answer. You said that you prepare for the very worst. This has got to be beyond what you could have ever imagined, as you just said a moment ago, in terms of how do you plan for something like this?
Well, you try to determine what the threats are out there. We do constant and frequent threat assessment here in the district and with the other regional governments, the local governments around here, and in close coordination with the federal government. So we were very fortunate today that we didn't have any of this disaster occurring within the limits of our city. Of course, our thoughts and prayers and hearts go out to the folks in New York and to the folks in Virginia. We did have some disaster, some tragedy here in D.C. There are reports that several students were on an airplane, one of the airplanes, 3 students and some teachers from local schools. And I think you've seen the news reports or have been running the stories about Barbara Olson, a great public servant here in the district, who was on one of those flights. So we have suffered tragedy, but not in the streets of the district.
Real quickly now, Margaret, what do you anticipate for tomorrow?
We are at the moment trying our hardest to get back to a state of normalcy here. The D.C. public schools are going to be closed tomorrow. We are still talking with our partners here in the other local jurisdictions to figure out about government operations. But we are operating under the assumption that we will have normal business operation tomorrow in the district.
All right. Margaret Kellums, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, we appreciate you taking time to talk to us tonight.
Thank you all.
By the way, the video that you're looking at here is what could have happened here, certainly. It is now burning there, as you see, in Arlington, Virginia. You're looking at the the Pentagon and the fires that they are still trying to put out these many hours after the incident took place.
Well, you know very well that this is also a story that is developing in New York, and we're going to listen into one of our sister stations. It's New York One. It's a cable network.
If there was a war, I'd be the first one online right now.
A lot of people probably are feeling that way today. We should note that Bellevue is the place where a lot of the EMS workers, the firefighters, and also the police officers who were helping to evacuate those buildings were taken. Only one fatality there that was so far that they've had a New York City firefighter.
What was the mood among the people who worked there?
Surprisingly upbeat, and they were workhorses. I mean, they said that their entire staff was there. We talked with the assistant director of emergency services there, who says he can't even get people to go. He can't get them to take breaks. They just want to stay in the emergency room. They want to treat these people. And something interesting that he said is usually they handle about 300 emergency cases a day. Now, of course, they've handled much more than that because of this tragedy, but people not involved in this, they'd only handled about 50 or so. He says that he thinks a lot of people are staying inside, they're not going out in the streets, so a lot fewer people getting hurt. But they said that they have a 1,000-bed capacity and they won't turn anybody away.
What was the thing that you noticed in terms of, you were trying to get down there, of course, obviously. Was it pandemonium? I've asked this question of the other reporters. I mean, was it hysteria or was it stun and shock?
I think it was a little bit of both. By the time we went to Bellevue, it was much later already. A lot of the streets were closed, but most people were off the streets. It's kind of like the city is a ghost town. Now, earlier in the day, we went and talked with a lot of people trying to get out of the city, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration was. People who don't live in Manhattan wanted to get not just to the other boroughs, but to New Jersey, or they wanted to get upstate, and they were stranded here. But even then, we found one woman who broke her foot, but was still willing to walk across the Manhattan Bridge because she knew other people needed emergency services more than she did, and she didn't want to take up their place online.
Very amazing.
It's amazing how something like this brings people together.
Well, they say that when there's chaos, that's the time to be the most methodical. Take your time with decisions, make the right one so you only have to do it once, and certainly these people in these medical centers take it as not necessarily business as usual, but a job that they have to have a cool head to do.
Yeah, and a job that they'll do as long as they have to, without a break, without going home, like I said.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. Now, as you can imagine, it was a chaotic scene in Lower Manhattan. New York One's own Howie Schleckman was headed toward the World Trade Center after the first plane crashed when he saw the second one hit. He describes the scene.
It was just chaos. It was just we got scared. We didn't know whether to proceed, to stop, or whatever. We were just dumbfounded. In my 32 years in the business, I've seen terrible, terrible things. I've never seen anything like this in my life. But it was just like in a movie. I mean, no different. People were looking and running the opposite way, and the cloud was just like following you. And what was scary about it is the police and the fire personnel, they looked even scared, like panic, complete uncertainty. Everybody had a scared look on their face. There were people crying. There were people hysterical. What happened was I saw a man that was covered with soot. And I walked him over to an ambulance. He seemed to be walking around in shock, said he was okay. And as soon as I got him over to the ambulance, he just collapsed. And I saw the EMS worker shaking his head. I think the man died. And he was a very young man. But never, ever will I ever forget this. I mean, I'm still shaking. This was hours ago, and I just don't feel right.
All right, we have a news release that just came in. Head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency reported today that President Bush has ordered the release of federal disaster resources and funds for New York to support emergency response efforts and aid victims of the catastrophic terrorist attacks in the World Trade Center this morning. Now, FEMA Director Joe Albaugh said the president took the action based on New York Governor George Pataki's expedited request for federal assistance. He went on to quote, "My heart and prayers are with the families of those who were killed and injured today, especially with the families that are waiting for news of loved one." And Albaugh said all the resources of FEMA, including our 5,000 employees, are at the President's disposal. 8 urban search and rescue teams are en route to New York, as are medical teams. He says, quote, "We will do all we can."
Well, many of the images that you've seen on your television screen today are something that you won't forget. Other people have not only had to see it, they have to smell it, experience it. They'll have the dust in their lungs for quite some time, and dealing with that trauma will not be easy at all. Dr. Alan Hilfer from Maimonides Hospital joins us once again to tell us about that process. Thank you for joining us again, Doctor.
Sure.
In dealing with people who have suffered loss, in my experience, there's always a phase from going from shock to anger to sadness. Is there a similar escalation of emotions, or does everybody have a different reaction?
I think that people have a fairly similar progression of emotions. It's probably more the degree in which they experience them that separates individuals from each other. There's usually a sense of disbelief, a sense of anger and rage, and then a sense of being able to begin to deal with whatever the tragedy that occurred was. The amount of time varies with people, but as I said earlier, the absolute need to share their experiences, to have someone to listen to them, to talk about it, are probably some of the most important things that we can do for victims of this terrorist attack, in helping them move through this and begin the process of healing, as well as in understanding our own feelings about what's happened and how we deal with these kinds of tragedies.
We have been listening to our sister station in New York, New York One, as they continue their live coverage tonight. Of course, their focus has been on the World Trade Center.
Yes, we're going to join the Fox News channel now for about 15 minutes, and then we will be back to bring you the very latest from right here in Washington, D.C.
Terrorists by killing them. And I'm saying to you that policy of not doing that may have hampered us in our fight against terrorists.
No, we've been hampered by a lot of new rules. For example, you can't even hire people who have a shady background. And of course, if we applied that rule domestically, you wouldn't get very many convictions, because most of the witnesses against criminals are criminals themselves. We basically have to face the realities that we're dealing with some very nasty, very desperate, and basically very fearless people. And if you don't want to deal with them, in an absolute sense, to actually go in there and either win or don't bother with it, then don't bother with it.
All right. Now, Colonel, do you feel this is a military operation at this point or an intelligence operation?
It's a combination. You're going to have to use the combined powers of the national intelligence community and the military intelligence capabilities to find this guy. Or whoever did this. I think it's very simple to keep talking about bin Laden. Bin Laden can't exist without money from Saudi Arabia, and he can't exist without being in the middle of Afghanistan. By the way, I don't need the Russians' permission to go to Afghanistan. We got the Pakistanis and the Indians who will be very helpful. We've talked about it, Bill, but we have not gotten serious about this guy or whoever else did this. And again, taking care of whoever did this terrible act, this day of infamy, we've got to also take care of the country or countries that have supported it. And war has been declared.
Okay.
Now what do you want to do?
Well, as you pointed out, Osama bin Laden is wanted by the United States right now.
Sure.
He's wanted for the Cole bombing. He's wanted for the bombings in Africa. There's no reason on earth why we should not be stalking and hunting down this man right now, just for those things. And then if he's implicated in this, then we have him already.
We've been hunting him. We've been doing all the ball and chain around us. With the people, I know the guys that are doing it. I'm telling you that they have not been. You've already heard where the national intelligence community is prohibited from hiring people or dealing with people that have nasty backgrounds.
Right, that's what Mr. Dunnigan just said.
That kind of stuff has got to stop.
I think we got to let the chains fall down and let the
Bill, you got
dogs
to unleash the dogs of war.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much. We appreciate it. Colonel Hunt in Boston, Mr. Dunnigan in New York, and Ambassador Walker in Washington, D.C. Shepard, I want to just debrief. We got about 90 seconds left here, and I want to go to Shepard Smith in New York. You've been covering the story all day. I saw you on top of the building looking down. And is there anything about the story and the coverage of it that is really, I asked this to Dan Cohen at the top of the hour, really stuck in your mind?
I think the silence is what stuck initially, Bill. In the moments after it all happened throughout the city, a very quiet, solemn, slow-moving sense of what has just happened, and I think that it is still here. There are hundreds of people outside our building in Manhattan right now, Bill, watching this on the monitors, all of them wondering, who do I know who I will never see again?
Right.
It is an overwhelming and indescribable feeling. Bill, I remember the hours after the Oklahoma City bombing. We knew what was going on there. We knew there were hundreds dead. We knew pretty much who they were. This is an attack on all that America is and all that America can be. And there is a real pall here tonight.
You know what impressed me is that in New York, a city of 8 million, and then when all the commuters come in, it swells sometimes up to 12 million people a day. You didn't have any looting. You didn't have anybody taking advantage of the situation. You had orderly evacuations, no panic. It was something that everybody realized that, look, this is the time to cooperate. This is the time to cooperate. Shepard, I'm going to throw it over to you, and thanks for the fine work you did all day today.
And Bill, thank you very much. Bill O'Reilly on Long Island this night, because he could not make it back to Manhattan.